Well, thank you for joining me for today's conversation. I'm catching up with Matt Wright. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to having. For those of you who may not be familiar with Matt, Matt is the former president of the Dubbo Chamber of Commerce and did an exceptional job of that. He is a current sitting council member for Dubbo Regional Council, and on top of all of that, he is the owner of MoneyQuest Dubbo and a home loan extraordinaire. Thank you so much for joining me today, Matt.
No trouble, Samuel. I appreciate those kind words, mate. And great to be able to help you out.
Great. Well, firstly, I guess, Matt, I know I kind of blew your cover there a little bit. Could you give us a little bit of a background, a bit of your story, I guess, both personally and professionally?
Of course. Actually, we're only looking at the calendar today because 30 years ago, exactly today, it's 29 years ago, exactly today, I joined the National Australia Bank, and that was my road to finance, I guess, not long out of school. So, and literally nearly 10 years to the day after that, we started with, was back then, Choice Home Loans. So the business itself here in Dubbo had been running for pretty much bang on 19 years, so celebrating our 20th year next year. That'll be exciting. We'll see what we can conjure up to celebrate that. Look, Forbes is home for me, so I haven't ventured too far from home, and we've been in Dubbo now for about 25 years with my wife Kristen's here working at one of the preschools, and the three kids that are very, very quickly growing up. So we're pretty firmly planted in Dubbo, and we've got a bit of a desire to stay here for a fair bit longer. So it's great having a business in a thriving city like Dubbo.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a great place, isn't it? I'm 40 this year and can't see myself ever leaving, so I'm loving the place. Now, Matt, on the home loan front, what are some of the major challenges you're seeing come up for buyers who are looking to purchase a new home at this stage?
Yeah, look, the obvious one at the moment is, of course, interest rates. You know, we are entering a rising interest rate environment, which we haven't experienced for 11 years, I suppose. The last time interest rates rose was over a decade ago now. So to go through a market where we're seeing interest rates rise certainly puts a lot of prospective buyers, puts their nerves out there. But look, the first home buyers are probably the ones that are most nervous because they've never seen interest rates rise at all. Most of them were probably very, very young when interest rates first started rising, or changing. So interest rates is the first one. But I suppose the other one is just is an ongoing challenge, and it's just that constant evolving nature of lenders and I suppose what they're concentrating on at any one time. You know, we saw a big push on living expenses, and banks really nailing down on people's living expenses for a while. And currently, we're seeing a big thing on consumers' non-disclosure of debts. And a good example of that might be an old Latitude card you had 20 years ago you don't use, but it's still hanging around. So banks really focusing in on non-disclosure of debts. But so I guess those sort of challenges, I suppose, point to one thing, and it's understanding where the market is at that particular point in time, and really what lenders are looking for in that market. So I think the best way to get that information and understand what the challenges are is to talk to some finance professionals and get some advice before you sort of start out on your house hunting journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, because you talk to buyers that are in their 60s and they remember interest rates anywhere from 17 to 21%, I've heard. And so this feels like a walk in the park for them. But there's over 1 million homeowners who've never experienced an interest rate rise up until this point. So it's a completely different environment, like you mentioned, for some of these people. Now, with these interest rate rises, what sort of an impact is that having on buyers that are doing their loan applications or have had a formal pre-approval granted already?
That is an interesting one, and it's one we've had a conversation in here internally about a number of times as well. I guess the thing to realise is that obviously interest rates have been historically low for quite a number of years now. When banks assess your capacity to repay, they don't necessarily assess your capacity to repay on that low interest rate. They'll assess it on that low interest rate plus a buffer, and that buffer is generally somewhere around, let's call it 3%. So whilst you might be paying a nice and attractive interest rate of say 2 or 3%, the bank will assess you at a capacity to repay of 5 or 6%. Now they're obligated to do that. That's a part of their the laws that are out there for lenders. They must have a buffer in place. So the thing to remember is that as interest rates are increasing, that buffer is increasing as well. And what that's doing is actually watering down people's borrowing capacities. That's really important, because if we have conversations with clients maybe a month or 2 or 3 ago, and we have another conversation today, it's very likely that the amount of money that they could have borrowed 3 months ago is going to be less than what they could borrow today. And that's really important when you've got clients that do have pre-approvals in place, because when it comes time to convert their pre-approval to a formal approval, the bank may just do a final assessment on the interest rate of today, not the interest rate of 3 months ago. So we are finding that on the odd occasion, clients who might have been borrowing to their limit all of a sudden can't borrow that money anymore. They're watered down by maybe 5 or 10%. So that's something that is a message we get out there for people who are maybe sitting on pre-approvals. Have a chat to your lender and understand what those interest rate changes mean to your borrowing capacity.
Yeah, look, that's something myself as an agent, I'm noticing on the ground. People that could borrow $1 million a few months ago are now at 950. People that were 750 are now 725, and it is having an impact not just on what we're seeing, but also on, I think, buyer confidence as they're navigating that. So that's a big thing. Now, I guess there's a lot of young people still keen to get in, have that Australian dream of owning a home, which is awesome. What advice would you have, particularly for those younger ones in the buyer community at the moment?
Look, I think if anything, the dream is still there. So the bubble hasn't burst. So certainly the dream is still there, and it's still very much alive. But I think the main thing is to get in early and plan. You know, we're in a society where I suppose we like things, you know, here and now, and we like that little bit of instant gratification. And when it comes to buying a home, that's not always the case. So you know, often we'll see clients 6 and 12 months out from, you know, actually making a purchase, so that they understand, well, what's that journey need to look like for the next 12 months. So even if you think you're a long way away from purchasing a home, certainly understanding what's the bank going to be looking for, what position do I need to be in, and what do I need to do now to prepare myself for that. So it is absolutely all about preparation. Look, don't be too concerned with interest rates moving. That will happen over the 30-year term of your loan. Hopefully you paid off quicker than that, but interest rates will fluctuate up and down. That is a standard thing when it comes to borrowing large amounts of money over extended terms. But I guess the main thing is just really understanding, well, what position do you need to be in, whether that's in 6 months or 12 months, and do that preliminary work now. It is all about that homework and the preliminary work, so you can put yourself in that best position to buy your first home when the time comes.
Yeah, look, I think that's fantastic advice. Now, we hear a lot about the impact Afterpay, zip money, etc., can have on your chances of like obtaining a loan. What's the reality of that, Matt? Is it folklore or is it legit?
No, look, that's an interesting one, and that follows on from the that last that point we discussed regarding first home buyers and understanding what sort of actions you need to take, or maybe what actions that you are currently taking now that might have an impact on you getting finance approval. And it's an interesting one you mentioned with Afterpay, Zip Pay, Buy Now Pay Later, I think is the CBA's facility. All those types of things do have an impact on your ability to obtain finance. Now, most people would understand that every single time they apply for finance, it does actually appear on their credit report. And banks can see every time you've applied for finance. They can see if you've had a facility in the last 2 years. They can now see your repayment history over the last 2 years as well. They can tell if you've got facilities open or not. They can tell the limits on your credit cards if you still have them. All that information is now available through what we call CCR, Comprehensive Credit Reporting, and this is relatively new. It's been out for the last year or two now, and banks have access to that. So it's a bit of a window to the soul when it comes to people's borrowing habits. Now, different types of loans actually appear on your report differently. For example, if you have a home loan that you've applied for in the last year or two, that'll appear in a certain section. And when you apply for home loans, that's not normally too bad. That's secured credit, and it's not looked upon too poorly. When we start talking about things like unsecured credit, multiple personal loans and credit card inquiries, those sorts of things, multiple inquiries for those types of credit inquiries can be seen as a little bit more detrimental. If you're purchasing a motor vehicle with money that you've applied for, you've purchased an asset, that's not so much of an issue either. But I suppose you could think personal loans and credit cards fall underneath home loans. They're the next level down. Then when you go the next level down below that, we start talking about these Afterpay, payday lenders, short-term finance arrangements. Now, for some lenders, this points to the fact that this may be a borrower who might have trouble budgeting or saving for short-term purchases, and those types of facilities can have an impact or a negative impact on your credit score occasions. So it isn't fictitious. It is fact. We have actually seen people's credit scores affected by those short-term type facilities. We would suggest maybe a credit card, or even further, save the money, purchase the item, and preserve your credit score, and maybe stay away from those afterpays, especially in the lead up to purchasing your first home.
Awesome. So, Matt, what you're saying is there's really nowhere to hide if you have a bit of a dodgy credit history. In that sense, if you want to suddenly jump into look at a home loan, I guess with that in mind, what would you suggest for people who have had a dubious credit history, but they're in a position where they're doing life better now, and they're wanting to step out and buy their first home or an additional home? What would your advice be to people like that?
Look, there are people out there that have had issues with credit in the past, and often the thing we see are minor glitches, things like phone bills, utility bills that may have been overlooked, and subsequently that provider has lodged a default on your credit history. Often those items are maybe less than $500. They may well have been paid since, but it is handy to know that those things will hang around on your credit history for 5 years from the time that they first went on there. So even a simple thing as missing a phone bill and having that written off by a phone provider, it's going to haunt you for a while. So I think the first thing for people to do is get a credit check done on yourself, get a copy of your own credit report, understand what's on there, because what you'll see is what a lender is going to see. And if there are some items on there that you need to address, it's better to address them sooner than later. Now, we have had experience in the past where people have had a default lodged on their credit report, and there are some companies out there whereby if you were to pay a certain fee, they would go into bat for you and help you remove that default, provided you fit some certain criteria. So we have had some people actually have those defaults and that removed from their credit history, gone, fading the existence and never seen again, which means that all of a sudden they would then be in a position to obtain finance, and their credit score will improve instantly. So I think the key there is get a copy of your credit report. You can do it online through Vita. If you Googled Vita credit score or Vita credit check, cost I think is around $50 to do that. Look, if you wanted to come in and have a chat to even us in our business or any other mortgage brokers in town or lend finance providers, they may be able to provide you with a copy of your credit report and give an indication on what needs to be looked at and where you're heading. So do your homework. That's a big one.
That's great. Love that you can pay someone to make it disappear. I thought that only sort of happened in the gang world, but here we are with home loans. That's exciting. Now, moving from that capacity to your capacity as a Dubbo Regional Council member, what are some of the projects or upcoming things in Dubbo that you're most excited about?
Yeah, look, it'll be hard to narrow it down to one or two, Samuel. There's an enormous amount of interest in Dubbo and the region on a number of different fronts. Look, obviously, the big one is obviously the let's call it the Dubbo Bridge project, which has been contentious on a lot of different levels, but it's happening. That's a significant project, obviously, on our doorstep, which many businesses will benefit from. We're not just talking people with a front end loader or a cement truck. There's side offices, there's cleaning, there's provision of catering. There's all sorts of things that come with those sort of major projects. So that's obviously a key one. I suppose one of the big one we'll see around the area over the next few years is the fact that Dubbo is a part of that regional energy zone. And so that's Dubbo is situated in that, obviously Wellington as well. And we're going to see a number of significant projects, both solar, wind, potentially hydrogen, and maybe even hydro as well over the coming years on our doorstep. So we'll see a lot of development, a lot of industry which will benefit off the back of that. There are probably a couple of key ones. We've obviously seen RMS around town with some traffic light projects and a few of those as well. That's been pretty exciting. From a residential perspective, fantastic to see, Church Street still simmering away there. The Mars development, obviously in Macquarie Street, even the RAF base for that matter, with some things slowly happening there as well. Continued expansion of those residential areas, construction on the go. So look, there is a lot of projects around, and I guess that's an exciting place that makes Dubbo a very exciting place to live. The employment opportunities and the business opportunities are enormous at the moment. So yeah, great place to be at the moment.
You're 100% right. And there's so much, I guess, government and also private sector confidence in the city. Everywhere you turn, something new is happening, something's growing, and that's very exciting. I think for the whole city, but those of us that are involved in that business level, there's a long future here, which is very exciting. Now, we've had so many investors purchasing and finding out more about Dubbo in the last 2 years. But I guess what would be your advice to people looking to invest, say from a metropolitan area? What are the key elements that they should be researching before making the decision to buy in a wonderful regional city like Dubbo?
Yeah, look, history, I suppose, is one thing we can look back on. Dubbo has constantly provided a pretty strong, steady return, and even from a capital growth perspective, it's always been a pretty steady sort of capital growth and a pretty steady rental return, offering a fair bit of stability for most investors. Obviously, we removed the last 12 months to 2 years out of there where we've seen record increase in property prices, but look, yields are obviously very strong. I think we start looking at things such as the diversity of the employment sector in the city. I don't think any one industry dominates any more than about 15% of the overall employment opportunities in the city. So that indicates that we are quite a broad employment base across a number of different industries and sectors. We look at the population growth; it continues to grow. I think Dubbo sits at around 1% year on year population growth. So that indicates that demand for people moving into the city is there, which means there is a continual demand for housing. There is obviously at the moment an undersupply, and you guys would know, like me, in town, that residential housing vacancy rates are incredibly low at the moment, well and truly less than 1%. So there is definitely a need for more housing. So whether that's investors constructing new homes or maybe buying some of these new units that are being built around the city as well. So I think there are a couple of key ones. I think the other one is really genuinely taking an interest in a lot of those projects, like you say, government and private funded projects that are on the doorstep of the city. There is a lot to roll out over the next over the next 10 to 15 years. There is a lot happening, and I think the opportunities for the city to continue to grow, and the opportunities for investors to provide housing for those people are never more evident. So it is a very exciting place to invest, without doubt.
Oh, absolutely. And, we've seen the market here explode over the last sort of 18 to 24 months. But I guess what that has meant for some people, it's priced people out. There are people who are just about to make their first purchase and suddenly house prices are just up and up. Is there any government incentive or is there any access to government funds to help people at the moment get into their first home or their last home? Is there something there?
That's an interesting one. Look, a lot of the government incentive at the moment is focused around first home buyers. So, for a while there, it was focused on first home buyers constructing a new home. So certainly was stimulating the construction industry. That was a key focus with the previous government. But so there are still incentives out there. First home buyers building a new home or buying a brand new home, for example, a specky or something like that, or even a brand new unit, can get their hands on a $10,000 first home buyers grant, and that money comes in on the day that they settle on their new property, or the day the slab goes down on their new home. First home buyers are still exempt from stamp duty, and to give you an idea, the threshold of stamp duty, I think, it's up to 650,000 now, whereby you could get a full waiver of stamp duty. For example, even if we talk the median house price in Dubbo of $500,000, or around the $500,000 stamp duty, and that'll be about 18 grand. And if you're a first home buyer and you don't have to pay that, that's a massive saving, of course. The next part of that, though, is what we call the home buyers scheme. It's just had a slight change of name. Typically, if you were to borrow more than 80% of the value of a property, you would pay lender's mortgage insurance, and the cost of that can be quite significant depending on your loan amount and how far above 80% you go. There are a couple of key borrowers that will be potentially entitled to avoid the cost of mortgage insurance. So first home buyers is one. First home builders is another one. So first home buyers and people are then building their first home. And the other one is single parents. Now that's a really interesting one. So the government introduced this one in the last 12 months, whereby if you are a single parent and you're looking to purchase a home, whether you purchased one previously or not, you would also be entitled to borrow potentially up to 95% of the value, up to 98% of the value of property for single parents, and avoid the cost of mortgage insurance. So again, if we talked a first home buying single parent let's say purchasing a $500,000 home, 2% deposit, they may only need about $10,000, and then they would just need the costs to cover, all the funds to cover their legal fees or the bank and government costs. They could potentially get in for $13,000 or $14,000. Now that's an enormous saving of mortgage insurance, enormous time saving as well. They don't have to wait to continue to save that money. So for single parents, that's a great one. The downside, of course, is if you're a single parent, you're only on one income, and sometimes that can actually limit the amount of money that you're able to borrow, depending on the role that you're currently working in. So look, there are a number of incentives scattered around. Sometimes they're limited with the types of lenders you can use. There are some conditions associated with it, but again, talk to your local friendly finance professional to find out all the nitty gritty with respect to that.
Yeah, wonderful. Look, that's so good. That gives people an in, I think, sometimes where they may not understand that there is access to this kind of funding. Look, Matt, it has been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate your time, your expertise, and your insight into what is a very interesting kind of real estate and mortgage environment at the moment. I found it incredibly useful. I'm sure those that are tuning in as well have also. So thank you, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in and hopefully learned a lot with us today. Take care.